This is the BBC Home Service. Here is a special bulletin read by Stuart Hibbard. The Associated Press office in Madrid has reported news of an attempted military coup in Spain. Heavy fighting is said to have broken out in several cities.
May the 1st, 1936, I was in Madrid. May Day. Watching a parade. I watched them, marching past, thousands of them, down the Paseo del Prado. The United Communist and Socialist Youth of Madrid. Ooh, Achipe! And then we had a picnic in the Casa del Campo. Everyone was there from the parade. Men, women, children, banners furled, put away, climbing through the pine trees. Every family with a basket of food, a 7-litre jug of wine. Oh, and a clothesline. That was very important, the clothesline. They'd choose a spot, tie the clothesline around the trees, and it was theirs for the day. The proletariat at play. I remember there was a notice that said, "Those who attach swings to the trees should realize that they are injuring the trees that belong to the people." Spain, in the summer of 1936. A year later, many of those people were dead, and the children were orphans.
70 years ago, Spain was in the grip of civil war. Army units supported by the fascists were in revolt against the elected government. As the fighting spread, millions became homeless. Among them, many thousands of children.
There was a committee calling for volunteers. They wanted people to drive trucks, medical supplies to Madrid. There were a lot of volunteers from England and the US, Australia. That's where I met Esme, in Madrid.
We had all these children coming in from the north, refugees from the fighting. They'd been wandering the streets, sleeping rough, living off scraps. I had over 100 I was trying to get to the coast, which was a bit safer. And I met Eric. I think he'd come from Valencia with medical supplies, in a bus.
She was from the Isle of Wight, the bus, donated by well-wishers. Esme was from Australia.
I came from Sydney, Australia. I was a member of the party.
She was a member of the Communist Party, a woman of strong convictions.
I think what got me was Hitler was in power in Germany, Mussolini in Italy. I mean, the whole of Europe looked like it was going fascist. And Spain was the battleground. Spain was going to be where we stopped them. No pasarán. They shall not pass. But the Germans were sending planes and the Italians were sending tanks. Britain and France were neutral. They sent buses from the Isle of Wight. And men like Eric. But he did have a bus. So we drove to the coast. I think that's when we met John Langdon Davies, on the road to Valencia.
I couldn't see the Spanish tragedy purely as a political affair on which one could take a vote. I thought one side right and the other wrong, criminally wrong. But more than that, I was obsessed with the disintegration of humanity, of human nature that comes with civil war. The greatest atrocity of all.
And then there was this other bloke from America.
His name was Nick Carter, from New Hampshire. His father was president of the Nashua Gummed and Coated Paper Company.
I came to England to get married. She had second thoughts a week before the wedding, so I kicked around Europe for a while, and then they were calling for volunteers to drive trucks, so I came to Spain.
He drove a truck from Barcelona to Madrid and took refugees the other way. But I think when we met, he was on his way back to England for the coronation of King George VI. His father had been invited as a personal guest of the king.
There were over 1 million refugees crammed into one small strip of coastline. And hundreds of thousands of them were orphans, with no shelter, no bedding, very little food or water. They were either left on the streets or herded into vast camps, and the war was getting closer and closer. What we needed was a plan.
We had the germ of an idea, that was all. I said, let's talk it over with the Duchess.
Catherine Marjorie Stuart Murray, Duchess of Atholl. They called her the Red Duchess, but actually she was a Conservative.
She was strongly opposed to Britain's policy in Spain, that is, of non-intervention. So in April 1937, she came over to see how things were on the ground. We told her we had a plan, at least the beginning of a plan.
We wanted to establish colonies for the children, the refugee children, away from the big cities.
Each child would have a sponsor, in England initially, but it wouldn't just be a case of providing money. There'd be a personal relationship between sponsor and child.
She liked it. When she went back to London, she held a press conference to announce the formation of the Foster Parents Plan for Children in Spain.
In the summer of 1937, things were going very badly for the government forces. There was a battle going on for Santander, in the Basque Country, and there was a feeling that if the government lost Santander, they'd lost the war.
We were in this village in the hills, north of the city. It was a collecting point for refugees, and many of them were children.
There was one. He was about 6. He had a sign round his neck. It said, This is Jose. I am his father.
I am his father. When Santander falls, I shall be shot.
For my sake, please take care of my child.
They lost 60,000 government troops, dead or wounded or taken prisoner. I think we all knew it was over.
Most of Spain was now in fascist hands, with loyalist forces holding out in Madrid, Valencia and Barcelona.
There were 1 million refugees in Catalonia. It was like a field of corn at harvest time when the reapers are at work and all the animals huddle in this small patch in the middle, and it's growing smaller and smaller, and at every corner of the field there are men with guns.
There was disease, malnutrition, very little food and water, and we kept bringing people in. There was nowhere else for them to go. It was hopeless. But then Nick came back from England with some good news.
We'd raised enough money for 2 children's colonies in Catalonia, and they'd asked me to run one of them, in the mountains near the French border.
It was a chateau owned by some rich Catalans and confiscated by the government.
It was a gloomy kind of monster of a building, but Nick and the kids, they did wonders with it. They painted it, they had pictures on the walls, photographs, they even had shows in the theatre. They even had a theatre there. They did puppet shows written by the children, but the audience had to participate. It was new theatre, you see. We all had to participate.
Nick worked wonders. He had a real nose for a bargain. He'd work the markets, always finding the cheapest stuff. In one place, he found 12 tons of potatoes, still in the ground. In another, 6 oxen. I don't know how he did it, but he bought them at prices that astonished the people working with us, and the people from Barcelona.
John came to visit and to write a report, and the children, they all knew what he was there for, and they all crowded around asking about their sponsors in England.
Some of them had letters. We had a girl from Madrid, Enriqueta, who translated every letter sent by the sponsors, and she gave the typed translation to the children.
They used to read the letters aloud to each other. I spoke to one boy, a boy of 12. He was very anxious to hear from his sponsor. I asked him, I said, haven't you had anything from him? And he said, yes, he sent me a present, but what I want is a letter. And they're all shouting, yes, we want letters so we know about our foster parents. Photographs and postcards were, well, the only word is they were cherished.
This kind of personal aspect to the plan, it's very exciting, you know, but it's very exacting. It takes it out of you. But what else is there in life?
The war went on, and the children kept coming. We needed more sponsors. The Duchess couldn't find them fast enough. So John came up with a new idea.
I'd been booked to do a lecture tour in the States. I suggested Eric come with me to find new sponsors and raise more money, and Nick decided to come too. He said his father had some rich connections, and he could be more use there than in Spain.
I met a crowd of Dad's friends at the Exchange Club in Boston. They said, well, we got problems of our own. It was just after the Depression, not a good time to ask for money. I said, look, things might be bad in America, but kids aren't being mown down by machine guns. They're not starving.
When we reached New York, the press were waiting for us. They'd heard what we were doing. I told them, suppose you were up against 1,000 cold and hungry children, many half-clothed, dumped late at night at a a lonely railway station. And suppose you knew at least 100 of them, some of them 3 or 4 years old, had no parents. Suppose you could only provide for 20 of them, what would you do? You'd have to choose, you'd have to be tough. I said, that's what we do. The rest? They'd spend the night in an empty cinema and then a concentration camp. But you wouldn't forget them. You'd never forget them.
I told him about the kids in the colony. 200 of them. In 5 months, I saw them grow from tired, hungry urchins into... I was gonna say normal, happy children, but how could that be? But at least they had a chance. They had a hope. And they'd started to forget horrors of the war.
They had a friend. That's what really excited them. The idea that they had a real friend in another country who cared about them.
I think this was what really moved the people in America. The idea of a personal relationship. I think this was when it really began to take off.
And then one day, the war caught up with us.
Last Sunday after lunch, we were playing at the garden gate because the weather was very sunny, and then we heard the sound of planes. We looked up at the sky and saw lots of planes. When we ran into the field, they'd already started bombing, and the little children and the girls were crying. The master and other grown-ups shouted to us to run towards France. We ran hard because the planes were on top of us. We heard lots of bombs. The next day, the master called us and told us next time every big boy should take a little one, and they taught us to throw ourselves onto the ground. Later, Nick came and said we must dig trenches.
Nick took it very badly. We talked about it, but I couldn't talk him out of it. He decided to join the International Brigade. The children were like... they were like they'd lost a parent. The day he left Lurigalisa, I think it was, despite all that had happened, I think it was one of the worst days of the war.
Nick trained as a paramedic in Valencia. They sent him to a fighting division on the Aragon front on March the 15th, 1938.
On the early morning of March 31st, his unit was ambushed.
He was reported missing, believed killed in action.
I came back to Spain to search for him. We met with some of his comrades who saw him after a battle near the town of Gandesa on the Ebro near Tarragona. They said he'd been wounded.
We went to Gandesa. It was occupied by the fascists. We tried to find him among the wounded and the prisoners, but no. Then we went back to La Regalisa.
The war was over. The fascists had won.
We decided we had to get the children out.
We led them across the border into France, all 300 of them. A long crocodile like a school outing, climbing over the Pyrenees.
So that's how it began. They were the first.
Today, Plan International works with children and their families and communities in more than 60 countries around the world. It reaches over 11 million people. But they were the first.
When Santander falls, I shall be shot. For my sake, please take care of my child.
In the house where Nick Carter was raised, in New England, since donated to the Red Cross, there is a plaque with an excerpt from one of his last letters to his parents. It reads, "I shall always feel these children are mine.
I shall always feel these children are mine. They have already started calling me Padre. Anything I can do for Spain, in whatever way, I do for the ideals I believe in, and more directly for these niños of mine. The little ones."